everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Real Conversations about Aging Parents. This is your host, Rebecca Tapia. Thank you so much for joining me this week. I'm going to return to a couple of weeks at least of some solo podcasts. I've missed talking to you directly, although I really do love the interviews that we have on the podcast. Those are really fun and hopefully good information and maybe even entertaining at times. But anyway, so there is a topic I want to talk about today. I've been thinking about how to do this podcast, and I don't know how it's going to go, but I'm going to give it a good college try. And it's the concept of appearances. So I really have researched a lot and thought a lot about our visual experience in life. And part of that is because I worked so long with patients with PTSD, and a lot of their PTSD is related to a visual stimulus that reminds them of some traumatic event. And so visual stimuli are amongst the most powerful stimuli we can have for the brain because the majority of our brain is actually dedicated to visual processing over other sensory experiences. So we do have part of our brain dedicated to hearing and taste and smell and touch, but the visual processing is a lot more complicated than those, right? So with touch, really, the brain is only processing localization, like where is the touch occurring? So is it a mosquito or a fly or my hand being burned on the stove? And then the calculation there is, okay, yeah, and is the touch positive or negative, dangerous or neutral? And if it says, oh, no, my hand is too close to the stove and my hand is hot, then there's a very base level processing, not even really up in the brain. It's at kind of the top of the spinal cord that just says, oh, that's dangerous. And you pull your hand back before you even think about it. So you're not thinking to yourself, I need to pull my hand back. And so just kind of thinking about all the different senses. When we go to vision, there's a lot more processing in that. There's a lot more that the brain is trying to understand and piece together. And it's one of the senses where the brain really fills in its own blanks, which is a really, really interesting experience. Most of what you see is actually there, but a good portion of your visual space is your brain inferring what should be there. So we do have blind spots. The way that our eyes are made, we can't see every single thing in full detail around us. And so even though when you open your eyes and look, it's like a full movie screen, a portion of that movie screen is actually inferred. So I know this sounds crazy, but only about 10 to 20% of what we see, like just opening our eyes and looking around, is actual literal information derived from the retina and processed through the brain. So that means the other 80 to 90% of what we see is actually constructed or inferred by the brain. So at any given point, it's sort of making its best guess and filling in the gaps. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, it's very process intensive for the brain to take all of the stimulus around it. And especially if your eyes are moving, left to right or scanning a horizon or a visually busy area, we don't have enough fast neurons to actually process all of that in total. And so basically it takes a small percentage of the visual space and kind of uses that as anchors and then kind of fills in the rest. And the way it does that is just by using memory and context and what it's expecting to see to kind of fill those things. And that's why if you're in a familiar environment and you're feeling pretty comfortable and suddenly you see something unusual, it really sticks out because your brain was just about to color that in as the thing it used to be. And then all of a sudden there's something new. And so anyway, I've always thought visual processing is some form of neurological magic because hearing doesn't really do that. And touch can do that in some ways as far as like imagine things that aren't really there at times. But vision is integral to our life. And so we're using our vision really to connect with other people. When I talk to people that miss someone, and you kind of go through what some of the language that they use when they're missing someone, and they'll say things like, well, I'm really just waiting for that person to walk in the door. And that is a visual experience, right? So they're not there and then they're there again. And so if we think about an aging parent, you really could apply this to almost anything, but if we talk about specifically an aging parent, your brain has almost like a caricature or an avatar that's in their brain that is that person. And as our parents age, and of course you could apply this to yourself as well, one of the things that changes over time for most people, unless they're very, very lucky, right, is their physical appearance. And so the image that you have of your parents in a unique way was built when you were very young and say they were, I don't know, young to middle aged, right? And so you have this archetype or this avatar in your brain of who they are. And when you're very, very small and they appear to you as very, very large or bigger than life or tall or whatever, they're just bigger than you, right? And so your brain is starting to build and piece together this avatar, like I said, this almost caricature in your head of who they are. And as you go about in life and as somebody starts to age, I think one of the transitions for that relationship is now you look different because I've built up in my head, say, I don't know, 0 to 25, exactly who you are and what you looked like. And you looked pretty much the same, at least in my book from that time. One of the visual experiences of having aging parents is that they change. Obviously, we're changing too, right? So it's not like, you look the same you looked 10, 15, 20 years ago. Just as trying to really get down into the nitty gritty of how complex this relationship can be and what some of the factors could be, is that they can visually appear to you as different. Maybe they are frail. Maybe they are debilitated or carry an assistive device, which is like a walker or a cane or a wheelchair. And so they appear to you differently. And so in life, it's one of those things where that becomes part of the experience of that person. And if you're having some grief or some loss, part of that is almost under the current here of I have a very strong sense of who they used to be. It was one of maybe the first person you built up in your brain was a parent, right? I mean, it's probably the first person you saw, if not the doctor, when you were born, and then maybe saw them the most percentage-wise for early part of your life, and then have been more consistent throughout your life, usually much more so than a favorite teacher or a neighbor, right? That parent has usually been kind of persistent through the years or decades. And so your brain has a lot of stored context and stored information about that person. And I'll contrast that if you are meeting somebody new for the first time and then you go meet their mother or their grandmother, that's your first context with them, right? I always talk about meeting my husband's grandparents, and I met them and they lived, I don't know, maybe another 10 to 12 years after I first met them. And to me, they always looked the same. I didn't have any other context, and they aged well. It just was, they were a constant to me. But I know to people around them that was that marked a change in their physical appearance. And that's obviously just part of aging. That's obviously a natural process. But I think when we're trying to articulate, one of the things that can be really difficult about going through the process of supporting aging parents is recognizing that own change in the context deep in our brain and what we make it mean or how we feel about it. And maybe we don't even know that it's there, because we certainly don't have that reference point for our own children, right? I mean, they start out very small and they get bigger, right? They get stronger, they get more capable over time. And just as we're watching that arc in life, and then we see the other arc for our parents and then our arc for ourselves, obviously this is all the human arc. And, we're all at different stages at different times. But when I think about how somebody appears, and again, I'm not trying to say like their fashion sense or anything like that. Another context is whatever we have stored up in our brain of who that person is usually not even just kind of their like outline. Some of it is, oh, that person used to dress up a lot to go to church on Sunday, or always have their hair done, or always have their makeup done, or always have their nails manicured and things like that. And so I would challenge us to think through what's actually stuck in that context. What is down in there? Because we don't naturally in our brains flex to, okay, well, here's the person that I have in this context. Here's how they look. Here's all these specific details about them. And then here's who they are now. And when you're feeling some sort of grief or loss about that, then part of it can be going back that deep, deep part of our brain that started at age 0 of the context of who that person is. And one of the things that I like to talk about is refamiliarizing the brain with the appearance of that person now. And that can be really difficult when there's, say, distance or you don't see them that often. But one of the ways that we can clue the brain in to update the context, if you will, is to spend basically undistracted time redigesting, downloading, reappreciating whatever they have at this moment, whether that's dusty gray hair or arthritic hands or a cane that they're using. I could imagine it would be natural to try to avoid that or to try to even avoid that person if they're presenting their appearance is separate than what we have context for. And I don't even think that it's conscious. I don't think it's like a voluntary thing. It's just, oh, I really feel safe and I feel okay when this person looked this way and now they don't look this way anymore. And we see this a lot, right? I'm a doctor that treats patients with disabilities. This is a huge psychological thing to overcome when somebody now looks different because of an amputation or because of a stroke, and helping the family as a unit readapt to that person. And part of that also is renormalizing and resetting the idea of what their appearance is. And I know even in talking about this, I don't want this to sound petty. I want us to talk about this from a neurological perspective of one of the factors that may be leading to some grief or even to some avoidance. And I want to talk about a sticky subject. One of the dynamics that I see set up on this topic is the child that's helping and support the aging parent trying to control their appearance in some way. And I think we can kind of talk about different layers of this and when this may be productive and maybe not so productive, right? And so if somebody desires to wear a certain outfit or a certain hairstyle or makeup or something, and they physically can't do it, they can't accomplish it because of a limitation or disability, I think that's an incredibly beautiful way to connect with somebody. And that's some of the most touching moments I've ever seen is somebody coming in and brushing somebody else's hair. There's just something really natural and magical about that. And so I think participating and helping somebody create the appearance that they want and desire and ask for assistance for can be productive and valuable for both. And of course, on the flip side, you can imagine, and I've seen this as well, where somebody who is maybe having difficulty shifting the context in their brain wants somebody to look a certain way, even if they don't desire it for themselves. And it could be that that's too challenging. Like, okay, we'll put all this makeup on, but are you going to stay and help me take all of it off? Or we can put these shoes on, but these shoes are really not going to help me walk the way I want to walk safely. So as you can imagine, you're kind of sitting on the edge of a sword there in some ways, right? Is this productive and constructive, or is this potentially destructive or dehumanizing to somebody else who you're saying, well, I want you to look this way. Usually it's a reference look in my head that I got from X number of years ago. And here, I'm going to bring you new clothes so you can look like that, or bring you the new shoes, or try to influence you in some way to look like that. So ultimately I can feel safe because now how you look is congruent with how I'm thinking in my own head. Another thing I'll mention, and maybe more in the context of mild dementia or early dementia, is there is still usually a highly preserved way of keeping up a physical appearance. And so even with mild or early dementia, the clothes can look the same, the hair, the makeup, a lot of those are automated type behaviors. So they put on the same makeup, I don't know, for 50 years. They've gotten dressed the same way for 50 years. They've done their hair the same way for 50 years. So a lot of those long-term life skills are well preserved, even in the setting of mild or even moderately advanced dementias. And so what can be really deceiving is you're thinking, well, every time I see this person, they look the same or kept up or something like that. How is it possible that they're also forgetting what day it is and not paying their bills and falling for gift card scams? And those two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, there can be a long period of sort of presenting as quote unquote normal or not impaired, but really having some impairments on the inside. And part of that also is just what their comfort level is. Like that's something they're comfortable doing. They're skilled at doing the dressing and the hair and the makeup. And of course, I keep referring to women because I guess they have a little bit more to keep up their appearance, but for males as well, right? So it can be dentition, it can be their glasses, their hair, whatever it is that is something that they took pride in, or that there was just their habit or their preference. That can stay preserved. Now, of course, if you're getting to a point where somebody looks very disheveled, way different than they used to, or you haven't seen them in a year and you show up and they're just physically not able to brush their teeth and brush their hair and put their clothes on, that is signaling a much more advanced or concerning change, whether it's dementia or something else going on. And so just checking in on somebody, just seeing them, preferably in person if possible, can tell you a lot. Now, one of the limitations, I mean, it's good we have technology because you can see somebody through technology. One of the limitations with technology is if you're sort of dropping in every 6 weeks or so, is something that you can miss is just what the environment looks like. So another concerning part of checking in on or caring for aging parents is they might be able to sort of jump on a Zoom and look fine, but then you look around and things look really disorganized. And so not just the appearance of them themselves, but the appearance of their household. How do they normally like to keep their house? Is their house normally, very clean, or is it very disorganized and that's normal for them? Do they have things out of place? I mean, just does it look different? Not necessarily judging, does it look good or bad, but like, is that different than what you've known of that environment the last 3 to 5 years? So how they appear to you both in person and then in their environment can tell you a lot of information about what's going on with them and if they may be vulnerable or maybe experiencing some changes that they're just not able to articulate or tell you about. Another more spiritual way of thinking about it, and I'm sorry, these are all kind of unrelated, but I find them to be all interesting, is I think about somebody who dies, who passes away. One of the most simplest ways to understand it neurologically is they just stop appearing to you live. Not alive, obviously. That sounds terrible, but like the main thing that changes for you neurologically is that person no longer appears to you in the flesh, alive and talking. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have videos or memories and so forth, but unless somebody is in front of you as you're speaking to them right now, they exist in a memory in your brain in the past, right? And there might be somebody you haven't seen in 10 years, but they sit somewhere in your brain in some group of neurons, the construct of, I don't know, Patsy, whoever you knew in like 4th grade. I don't know who's named Patsy now. My grandmother's named Patsy, so I guess I just use that. But like the idea is most of what we know of other people, and again, I have to say outside of the internet, that's going to change things, but neurologically is a composition of the times that they appeared to you and the time that you spent together seeing each other. And your brain, as you're sitting across from somebody, is downloading and updating information about that person. That's why if you see somebody a lot, you have usually a stronger connection to them. That doesn't mean a positive connection, but a stronger neurological connection to them than if you see somebody very infrequently or somebody that you used to have a really strong connection with visually. And then they say, come visit after 10 years and you see them again. That's a very interesting neurological experience, right? Because your brain has all of this stored context for them. And then it kind of rekindles or retouches that at that point. And so when I think about how, when I lose somebody, do I feel peace? And part of that is I love this thought. It's like a warm blanket, which is, they've stopped appearing to me in person. And they're okay and I'm okay. And I'm really lucky to have everything that I downloaded or built or the context I built for that person in my life. And I get to keep that forever. And which, of course, if you take it a step further, then you say, well, then that's why I would want to prioritize in my life building those connections or building those experiences with people that I care about, because I'm greedy and I want all of that. And so if this all goes away someday, at least I get to keep that, right? And so I love that sort of very natural and innocent explanation. And not to say that there isn't a tremendous amount of pain and grief in thinking about that and what your experience is, but neurologically, what the deeper parts of your brain, that person just stops appearing. And if you think about it in that terms, neurologically, there's probably hundreds or thousands of people I've met in my life that are in the same fate as my head, right? In my head, because I'll never see them again. They'll never appear to me again. And it's just sort of been consolidated in the back of my brain. That's why when you see somebody that you don't expect to see, that it's a really interesting phenomenon, right? It's like a different feeling and that's a quirk in the brain. It's like could be exciting or scary depending on who you're seeing. But there are people in my life that I would really love to see again that I can't. Some because they passed away and some just because of logistical reasons. And there's some people that I hope I never see again in my life. And so, but there's these like little contexts built up for all of them. And so I focus on the people that I want to have a high context for and be part of their context, especially for my kids, right? Like, so I want to be there with them. So I'm recording this. We're at a park in San Antonio. It's a pretty breezy day. They're out, doing drawing and crochet, not because I'm a like super good organic granola mom, but because we have so much hustle and bustle and screen time. I'm like, we're going to have one day where we're not. And so here we are. So I am not bragging about it. This is the antidote to lots and lots of bad parenting. But yes, we are here. So anyway, and I think about this because I want them to have a really good context to think about their time with me, their time as a kid, their time growing up. And that's really what we are, right? We're parents, we're there to build context for them. And as my parents age, and I think about that too, like I want to keep adding context, creating opportunities, creating options for them to participate and to create memories with the kids. And that doesn't necessarily have to be on really extensive vacations. That can just be, well, that's fun too. I do that a lot. But that can be as simple as just spending extra time sharing a meal or a card game or something like that. And so anyway, I feel like I'm getting on some soapbox. I really am not. I really, really like to think of neurological experiences, and I really want to point out that appearance is quite the interesting neurological phenomenon. And I would challenge you to think about what, if any, grief or drama you may have over the appearance of somebody else, of course, in this context, an aging parent, and try to readapt to that, just like the brain readapts to a lot of things. Look at the person. And when you talk to people that are disabled, not that I can speak for all people with new deformities or disabilities, but a lot of them just want to be seen and be reaccepted as whatever new appearance they have. And so some of this is also just normalizing looking at somebody and reacting to somebody and getting back into a comfortable reaction, even if now like the left side of their body doesn't work, or even if now, they're using a walker or something like that. And again, this just sounds like I'm trying to be a goody two shoes, and I'm not. I'm just talking about it from a recovery perspective of helping that person have a higher quality of life is being intentional. And then also if somebody has experienced a change in their appearance, again, like all the examples we talked about, maybe they're using something to help them get around, or maybe they're not able to walk as well. And if it feels right, it feels comfortable, and you want to discuss it with them, if they want to talk about it, sometimes avoiding it and making sure that you never look at the amputated limb or you never do this or that. I mean, that also might, not be great for their recovery either. Right. And sometimes you just have to fill it out. And at the end of the day, if somebody says, well, how do I know what to do? The vast majority of humans that are not sociopaths do what feels right in that moment. And if you're acting out of kindness and genuine concern and care, like you'll know what to do. And if something comes up that's too awkward, you'll know what to do then too. And so I would encourage not being kind of stuck in, I have to be perfect and I have to be right. It would just be, how do I create a safe space to talk about this change in appearance, if that's what they want to talk about, or if they don't. But one of the things that you can do yourself is to renormalize your own context and give yourself some grace and space too, right? It could be really challenging for somebody who's normally been towering over you to suddenly be in a wheelchair and you're always looking down. There's literally a different neurological experience as looking up at somebody versus looking down at somebody. And that's a very important psychological part of how somebody feels in comparison to you. And that's why these, malignant bosses always want to have a chair that's higher than yours so they can look down at you. And so part of this, how we make eye contact, how we re-accept somebody visually, is to be on their level, literally, visually, right? And so when you walk in, try to sit down as quickly as is comfortable so that you're on eye level with somebody versus standing over them, which can feel intimidating and can feel, even if they're not experiencing that consciously, like I feel intimidated, it is a different experience if it's ever happened. And I'm sure you can relate to that. And so one of the ways, again, we can sort of reset the context is to try to keep at least even the perspective of how that person appears to you and try to keep it on level versus, oh, now they always appear to me and they're laying down and I'm always standing over them. And you can think about that even in terms of the environment. So like with my grandmother, She's in a hospital bed in kind of a small room in the back of the house at my cousin's house. And it is difficult to not stand and tower over her because of the way the room's arranged or isn't seating right next to her. And maybe next time I go, I should bring something. But I noticed that the last time I was there, and I was like, that's why this feels a little uncomfortable to me, because it does feel like you're way down there and we're way up here and kind of talking over you versus sitting next to you. And so you can think about just even the furniture arrangement or the way that somebody's interacting with most people. Are they able to sit up in a chair, which I think is good if they can tolerate it. That's a normal way, eyesight-wise, to interact with other people, but just being conscious of it. And again, I'm not a perfectionist. I wouldn't say like, oh, every time you get in there, you got to sit down as quickly as possible. I'm only sharing this information because I think it's fascinating, for one, and two, when we're looking for little things that we can control, because there's so much that we can't control about this process and about this adjustment. That's one of the few things, right? One of the few things. So anyway, I know that was kind of all over the place. I appreciate you listening. I hope it was helpful, and I will talk to you again in a few weeks. Hey everyone, it's Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd like to take just a moment to review the disclaimer. This podcast is for informational and occasional entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed here is formal medical, legal, or financial advice. By listening to the podcast, we are not creating a patient-doctor relationship between you and myself or any of the guests. Really, it's just me and a possible guest or two, sometimes three, sitting around talking about difficult topics related to aging parents. If you have or suspect that you might have a medical problem or condition, you should seek advice from a licensed medical professional. If you have any questions or concerns, please read the full disclaimer in the show notes or contact me directly. Thank you again for joining us today. I can't wait to see you next week. Have a good day.